Welcome back. Today we are going to do a short analysis of the new tribe in preparation for your September record exam and for your final November exams. So let's get started. Some background on Buchi Emecheta. She was obviously, you know that from your studies this year, born in Nigeria in 1944. She died in 2017 when she was 72 years old. She moved to London in 1962 with her, at that stage, 4 children to join her husband, who was studying in London, and she started writing. This short story, The New Tribe, that we are discussing today, and which is one of your 8 short stories, is actually an extract from a novel that she wrote with the same name. They just made the extract and presented it to us as a short story, but the story does go on. It's actually a very interesting story. So if you are interested in reading, you would do yourself a favor if you can get hold of the novel and read it, but please not before the end of the year, because the way I know my matrix, they are going to remember the rest of the book and not the short story. So don't confuse yourselves, only listen to it after you have written your final exams, please. So, a summary of the story quickly before we start with the analysis. We do know that we have 2 characters to start with, the Reverend Arthur Arlington and his wife Jenny, who were unable to have their own children. Then one morning, on the first page of the story, still Julian, the local paper boy, brought a baby girl whom he found in a Tesco bag in a phone booth to them. He didn't know where else to take it, and most probably, seeing that Arthur Arlington was the Reverend, he brought the baby to them. They adopted Julia. When Julia was 2 years old, social services wanted to see them again, and they told them about Catherine Mba, a Nigerian woman who followed Julia's story in the newspaper, and she was unable to keep her son Chester and asked in a letter that they look after Chester. Knowing that Buchi Emecheta was a Nigerian woman where gender inequality was rife, this is one of the things that she touches on, where a Nigerian woman was not allowed to keep another man's child because her new husband didn't want to look after him. Now, Chester was the only black child in the community of St. Simon, and he grows up with a sense of unbelonging. His mother also tells him after the Christmas play, the Nativity play, that the East is where his people came from. Eventually, Chester forces the Arlingtons to tell him about his biological parents. Obviously, Arthur, who is somebody who walks the straight and narrow, and he believes in telling the truth, tells them the exact details of their adoption. Now, imagine what that does to a young girl hearing that she was picked up in a Tesco bag in a phone booth, to a young boy hearing his mother didn't want him anymore because she married another man. So obviously, they were deeply affected by the truth, and both children become withdrawn. Chester then starts having these regular dreams about Nigeria, and Julia just stares into space. At the end, however, Chester accepts his difference. He embraces the love that his parents have for him. He accepts that they honestly love him, and he calls his father the Rock of Gibraltar. Now, the first thing that you always do whenever you read a short story, a poem, a drama, a novel, after you have read it, you ask yourself, so what is the significance of the title to what I have just read? And obviously, the story is called The New Tribe. Chester, coming from Nigeria, belongs to a tribe, although he is now part of a white family. And Buchi Emecheta wants to show us as well that the old tribal system is changing. There is a move towards a more global sense of identity. In this story, we have a family, a tribe, that is made up of mixed races. 3 white people, 1 black boy. And then also, the story explores how Chester and his family discover this new identity, how they adapt to it, and how they make peace with it. Because it is a process of growth, it is a process of acceptance. They have to find a sense of belonging, especially then Julia and Chester. The narrator of the story, remember the narrator is always the point of view from which the story is told. In this story, we have a third person omniscient narrator. What does that mean? It means the narrator can read the thoughts of characters, where when you read your story again, you find these places. For example, where Jenny was scared that the mothers were going to come back to claim their children, where Arthur was now alone and Jenny was fulfilled, where Arthur didn't realize what a natural mother Jenny would be. So, because the narrator can read the character's thoughts, he is able to give us all sides of the story. But still, at the end of the short story, the narrator allows the reader to come to his own conclusions about the events in the story, about the meaning of the story, and that is always the hallmark of a good story. Now, there you have a plot diagram. You must have seen it somewhere in your life before, also called the Freytag's Pyramid. This shows us how the story is told. All stories, short stories, novels, dramas, that is the pyramid that the plot follows. There's the exposition, the rising action, where the main character faces a series of conflicts. Eventually, we have the climax, which is the most exciting part of the story. Not necessarily happily exciting, but it is the point of no return. Something happens and the characters' lives change irrevocably. Then we have the falling action, and usually the falling action cannot be as long as the rising action, otherwise the writer is going to lose the reader's interest. And then eventually the resolution. How does the story end? Now, how is this story told? In your Mind the Gap study guides, the writers separate the setting from the exposition, but remember the setting is always part of the exposition. This story has been asked once since 2017. And in this one question, they ask where it was set. It's in modern day England. Remember that the author moved to England, and it is in a small, white, conservative and religious community, and the little town is called St. Simon. Now, the structure and the plot development. Exposition, as I say, traditionally setting is part of exposition. The Mind the Gap authors have separated the two. In the exposition, we meet the Arlingtons, we meet the 2 children, Chester, who is black, Julia, who is white, and Julia is very protective of her brother. My Matrix could not answer this question the other day. How much older is Julia than Chester? Remember, Julia was 2 when social services came back to talk to the Arlingtons again, and Chester was 18 months old. So she was round about 6 months older than Chester. The rising action, where the conflict starts, is where Chester becomes aware he is different because he's the only black child in this community. Remember how the author mentions that it is like learning to eat. You can't remember when you learned to eat. It just happened gradually. So this awareness that he got was not something that dawned on him all of a sudden. As he grew up, he realized he was different. When he goes to school for the first time, he was out of his mother's protective environment, and the principal calls him a little devil, not meaning anything by it. It's just that he caused the chaos. But Julia, who is so super protective of Chester, she takes it as an insult, and she tells the principal, he is not the devil, he is my brother. Chester is then given the role of the king in the Christmas play. Remember how his friend's father calls him the King of the Orient in a joking manner. Then after the play, he learns that he is originally from East Africa, hence his blackness. When he asks his mother, where is the Orient? She says it is in the East where your people are from, which only exaggerated his sense of being different. The climax of the story is where Chester asks Arthur Arlington out of the blue who his real parents are. He tells them about their adoption, and because of this, they become introverts. Chester then refuses to be king in the next nativity play. They hear that one of the reasons is because the children call him the king of the devils, which intensifies his awareness of being different. Then the falling action, very short, is where Jenny is disappointed that Chester is not part of the play. He works backstage, which suited him perfectly fine. In that exam paper where the new tribe was asked, they asked, why is Jenny disappointed that Chester is not in the play anymore? And the answer in the memo, there are various options, and here you have them. They said that Jenny believed the role suits Chester because he is black, and the whole nativity scene is set in the East, in the Orient. Or you could have said she has already made his costume, or for her it was a fitting role for him because she wanted him to find his roots or his identity. Remember how she also made him that picture book when he was small, went to the library, did all the research. Then the resolution is where Chester tries to make it up to his parents. He makes an elaborate Christmas card and he buys a pretty diary for Jenny with her favorite flowers on the cover of the diary. And then they make peace. Final part of the story is where Chester realizes his father is the emotionally stronger parent. He calls him the Rock of Gibraltar. Characterization. They often ask you to compare two characters or to explain what we see of a certain character in a certain extract, so you need to know this as well. The Reverend Arthur Arlington is a gentleman who seldom loses his temper, generous and loving, and he is supportive and dependable, and that is what makes it so surprising that he loses his temper one morning at breakfast when he yells at Chester and keeps him back to do the dishes. Jenny Arlington is a kind woman. She's loving. She honestly loves her adoptive children. She tells them that God has given them to her. And then she is compassionate. Chester Arlington is a sensitive boy, not only about the color of his skin. He is a sensitive boy, but he's also sensitive about the color of his skin and being the only black person in the community. He is a dreamer and he is assertive about his identity and independence at the end, which, remember, caused the conflict where he refused to take part in the next nativity play, which his mother then accepted. Compassionate. Julia Arlington, his sister, is a sensitive child who loves her family very much. She is fiercely protective of her brother, and she becomes withdrawn after discovering that she is adopted. Now, you know all these facts about these characters, but when you get an extract from the short story and they ask you to look at lines 7 to 10, and which aspect of this person's character is revealed in these lines, then you have to decide in those lines specifically which characteristics are revealed so that your answer fits in with that part of the short story. You can't just plonk down whatever you know. You have to choose the information carefully and answer the question correctly. Answer what they want. The themes, always, 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 there is a theme question. I'm going to show you one now. So there are 3 themes in the new tribe. The first one is racial integration. As we've seen in the title, The Arlingtons and the community of St. Simon have to adapt to having only one black child, and Chester learns to accept he is different and how he learns to cope with the fact that he is different, the only one of his kind in the community. The second is mixed race families. The Arlingtons have adopted 2 children, one of whom is black, and they have to learn how to deal with Chester's cultural and racial differences. Jenny tries to keep his culture alive for him. So the question that you also have to answer to yourself is, when he starts having these daydreams about his past, he was 18 months old. He cannot possibly remember what happened in the little town that he is dreaming of in his daydreams. So does he remember this from the little book that Jenny made him? And then obviously the theme of adoption, where the process of adoption is a long and difficult one. Arthur told Jenny that he cannot go through this again. This is the last time after adopting Chester. Then obviously Jenny, who is the more emotional one of the couple, is always worried that one of the 2 biological mothers might come back and reclaim her child. In the exam, the question on themes was the following. One of the themes in the short story, The New Tribe, is insecurity. Discuss this theme, 3 marks. Now, none of the 3 themes that we just discussed had as a heading insecurity, but all 3 of them definitely touched on insecurity. So this was the answer. And remember, it's 3 marks. If a question counts 3 marks, you have to say at least 3 things. At least 3 things. Remember, the art of writing a good exam paper is not to see who wins by writing the fastest and who completes his paper first. You have 2 hours to finish this paper. The art of writing this paper is to see who can write the full 2 hours and get the most marks. So don't think, oh, this is a long answer. When my kids write down the answers, they always say, why is this answer so long? Because we want you to know everything possible so that you can get a good mark. So here's the answer. From a very young age, Chester feels that he doesn't belong. The insecurity manifests itself when Chester goes to school and doesn't want to stay there. When Jenny talks about your people who are from the East, Chester begins to doubt who he is. Chester knows he's different and feels he has to do so much more to be accepted, which deepens his insecurity. When Chester and Julia are told they are adopted, both become insecure. Chester escapes to his dream world and Julia becomes introverted and stares into space. And then the theme of insecurity could also relate to Arthur and Jenny. They fear that they will not be accepted as adoptive parents or that the biological parents will return and claim the children. Remember, you have to discuss all the characters to whom this theme of insecurity is applicable. The more you write, the more your chances of getting 3 out of 3 for that question. The competition is not to see who finishes first. Figures of speech. You always get a figure of speech question. They give you a line extract and they tell you identify the figure of speech and discuss if it's applicable. So there are many more examples than the ones that I have here. These are the ones that they gave to you in the Mind the Gap study guide. The room was frozen into silence. What is personification? Personification is when a human characteristic is given to an inanimate or non-human object or thing. The room was frozen into silence. Discuss this figure of speech after you have identified it. So you say, the room is not silent. A room cannot be silent. A room is a dead thing. The people in the room are silent. And this emphasizes the shock the Arlingtons feel when they realize the baby is black. Now that question is going to count probably 2 marks. So you can't just say the room is not silent, the people are silent. You have to go on. I always tell my learners, don't stop. Ask yourself when you've written the answer, so what? How does my answer tie back to the question? Does it finish answering the question or do I stop halfway? If you stop halfway, write more. You have more than enough time to do that. Similes. What is a simile? Simile is when two things are being compared because they have similar characteristics. Whenever you answer a simile or a metaphor, you have to tell me what is being compared to what and why. You have to tell me why the author decided to compare those two things. So one simile in this short story, it's during the final nativity concert when Chester was working behind the scenes and he wasn't part of the actors. Ginny, she clapped half-heartedly, wilting like a dying rose. So tell me what is being compared to what and why. Ginny's lack of enthusiasm that Chester is not a king is being compared to a dying rose petal. And why? It is as if she has no energy and is fragile, just as a dying rose petal has no energy to live. Another example. The author mentions that the Arlingtons are like a good, strong tree under whose shadow Julia and Chester grow up. The love and protection that the Arlingtons show to Julia and Chester are compared to the shade that a strong tree provides. I would have liked my learners to still add there so they could thrive because they were loved and protected. What is being compared to what and why? That is the answer that was in your Mind the Gap study guide. Personally, as I say, I would have liked my learners to add the third point. Another one, the last one that I'm going to discuss with you, it was like opening an oven. So what is being compared to what and why? The high and unbearable noise at the miller's is compared to the heat from the oven, which is high and unbearable. A metaphor. Now, a metaphor, remember, is a direct comparison. They left out the like and the as. His father is the rock of Gibraltar. Chester compares Arthur to the rock of Gibraltar because he's emotionally strong and safe and dependable. That is a picture of the rock of Gibraltar. That rock, they estimate, was formed during the Jurassic period. So it's been standing so long, it is unshakable. So his father is emotionally strong and safe and dependable. Tone. What is tone? Tone, according to the dictionary, is the general character or attitude of a piece of writing, of a character, of the writer or the poet. I always tell my learners, tone is the writer's attitude towards his piece of writing, or it is the character's attitude that we see in that specific line at that specific moment of the story. So in this story, there is a joyful tone when the children arrive in the family. There's also a matter-of-fact tone that Arthur uses when he tells the children about their backgrounds, which in some people's opinion might be rather insensitive, but for Arthur, with his view of the world, he calls it telling the truth. There's also a commanding tone, which Arthur uses when he punishes Chester for laughing at Julia. And there is an apologetic tone, which Chester uses at the end when he gives Jenny her Christmas gift. Now remember, you learn all these, but the commanding tone might not be applicable to the line reference that the examiner wants from you. So be very careful, read with discrimination, and decide how does the character feel at that moment when he is saying those words or when that event is happening. How is he feeling? What is his attitude? And that is then your tone. They asked in that exam paper, this was line 9 of the extract, and they said, Jenny said, I just didn't realize you felt so strongly. Remember, it was when Chester refused to take part in the nativity play anymore. So the instruction was write down one word. You see how big I made that? Because if the examiner wants one word, you don't write 2. You don't write 3. You write one word. So the instruction was write down one word which best describes how Jenny is feeling in this line. And the answer was apologetic, remorseful, She was sorry that they had the fight because she didn't realize that he felt so strongly about not being in the nativity play. Remember, you cannot explain this in your script. You have to give one word: apologetic, remorseful, sorry. They might perhaps accept sorry. The mood. I always tell my learners that the tone is the attitude of the writer about his piece of writing, or about a character at a certain stage, or of a character at a certain stage in a story. Mood is how that tone, how that attitude makes the reader feel. So there is a sense of alienation, a mood of alienation, fear of rejection, because Chester emphasizes his feeling of being left out, of unbelonging the whole time. The reader fears the whole time that he is going to be rejected by somebody, because you don't know the story when you read it the first time. So there's this fear of rejection. Is anybody going to be so insensitive as to reject this child? And also there's tension and frustration because of the miscommunication, because of the fact that the children start being withdrawn. Poor Ginny, Arthur, the fact that they struggle to try and define what their family is now. Then you will, in all your exam papers, have at least one level 5 question. A level 5 question is where you have to give your opinion. Obviously, you cannot say whatever you want to. Your opinion must be grounded in the text. In that one paper I told you about, the question was, do you sympathize with Julia? Discuss your view, 3 marks. 3 marks, at least 3 points. And obviously, you might sympathize with her or you might not. So there's always a yes and a no option. But if you can give the marker the yes and no answer, well motivated, your chances of getting 3 marks are much bigger than just giving 1. It also shows that you can see a certain problem from more than one side. Remember, you don't get a mark for yes, you get your mark for the motivation. Julia is abandoned as a baby and brought to the Arlingtons by the man who delivers the newspaper. Actually a boy. As the elder child, Julia is expected to take care of or protect Chester because he's different. She knows what he's exposed to at school. She develops an inferiority complex, or she becomes withdrawn, or she avoids eye contact with people after her parents tell her that she has been adopted. Or, if your opinion is no, you do not sympathize with Julia. You could have motivated by saying the Arlingtons are loving parents and being adopted is not a sin or shame. It should not make her feel inferior to other people. Unlike Chester, she is white and less likely to be mocked at school, so you don't really sympathize with her. Or she now has opportunities to develop which she would not otherwise have had with her biological mother. 3 marks, 3 points, well discussed, will give you the 3 marks. Otherwise, you say yes, motivate, and on the other hand, I don't sympathize with her because, and you give your reasons. And that is it. Remember, you can learn from a study guide as much as you possibly humanly can. If you do not know your story, it is all in vain. You need to honestly read the story multiple times. Then you go to your study guide to learn the notes, and then you will be successful. You cannot only rely on your study guide. When my one class wrote a test about this the other day, one of them told me, "Ma'am, I didn't know there were children in the story." Imagine my reaction.